At 75, people said I should be slowing down, but that morning, my hands trembled with a kind of excitement I hadn't felt in decades. My joints protested as I lifted my small suitcase onto the airport trolley. Yet my heart felt strangely young, almost girlish. I had barely slept the night before. How could I? My only son was getting married. My stubborn, brilliant, maddening boy who once clung to the edge of my dupatta as though the world would swallow him without me. And now he was starting a new life. Every step I took through the airport felt like walking toward a dream I had waited years to see unfold. I had paid for my own ticket. I didn't tell him that. He had promised he would arrange everything, but work got too busy, and I didn't want to trouble him. At my age, trouble becomes a word you swallow quietly, as though asking for anything is a burden. So I dipped into the small savings I had kept aside for medical emergencies, and bought the ticket myself. It didn't hurt me. In fact, it made me proud. I was still capable, still able to show up for my son without depending on anyone. Inside my handbag, wrapped in soft muslin, lay the heirloom veil. A delicate ivory piece embroidered by my own grandmother's hands. It had been passed down through 4 generations of women, each one wearing it on their wedding day. I had taken it out of the cupboard 3 weeks earlier, dusted it carefully, and pressed it with the gentleness one gives to a sleeping child. I imagined my daughter-in-law's eyes lighting up when she saw it. I imagined her gratitude, her warmth. Beside the veil were gifts, bangles, a gold locket, and hand-stitched table linens I had made myself. It took me a whole month to embroider those patterns, sitting by the window every afternoon, letting the winter sun warm my back. Each stitch held a blessing, a prayer, a mother's whispered hope. As I waited at the boarding gate, I caught myself smiling. A young couple sat beside me, holding hands and whispering. I felt a familiar ache, nostalgia, sweet and sharp. I remembered my own wedding day, how my late husband had looked at me as though I were a miracle. He had been gone 25 years now, and still, the memory of him could steady me like nothing else. If he were alive, he would be just as excited, perhaps even more than I was. Our son had been his pride. Boarding now, the announcement played. Slowly, carefully, I walked down the jet bridge. My knee cracked, and a flight attendant offered to help, but I shook my head politely. No, not today. Today I walk on my own. During the flight, I watched the clouds through the window, soft, white mountains drifting lazily across a pale blue sky. My fingers brushed the muslin pouch in my lap. I imagined the wedding hall, the flowers, the lights. I imagined my son spotting me and rushing forward like he used to when he was little. I imagined belonging. When the plane landed, people rushed to collect their bags. I moved slower, steady, savoring the last moments before reality greeted me. My heart thudded with anticipation. I took out my phone to let him know I had arrived safely. But before I could type a single word, the screen lit up. A message from my son. 5 words. Cold. Sharp. Final. Don't come to the wedding. I froze. My ears rang. My legs wobbled. The entire airport blurred around me. The chatter, the announcements, the rolling bags, the moving crowds. Then another ping. It'll be awkward. We'll talk later. And just like that, the joy I carried across the skies shattered inside me, quiet and cruel, like glass breaking in an empty room. For a long moment, I simply stood there, staring at the glowing screen as though the words might rearrange themselves into something softer, something kinder, something a mother could survive. But they didn't. Don't come to the wedding. It'll be awkward. Awkward? My presence awkward? A man pushing a trolley bumped into me gently and apologized, but his voice felt distant, muffled, as though I were standing underwater. I forced myself to walk toward an empty row of seats near the exit. My knees shook with each step, not from age this time, but from the weight of a heartbreak I wasn't prepared to carry. I tried calling him. Once. Twice. 3 times. Straight to voicemail. My fingers trembled as I typed a reply. Beta, I'm already here. What happened? Should I wait somewhere? But the message showed only 1 gray tick, not 2. He had switched off his phone. A silence opened inside me, wide, echoing, terrifying. People around me laughed, greeted loved ones, held flowers and balloons. A family embraced their grandmother tightly. A young boy ran into his father's arms. Life around me overflowed with welcome, while I sat alone clutching the heirloom veil, as though it were the only proof I still belonged somewhere. A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. I wiped it quickly. At my age, you learn how to hide pain. You learn that grief must be swallowed quietly, without disturbing anyone. I opened my contacts and dialed my niece Miriam, the only relative who occasionally spoke to me. She answered on the second ring. "Auntie, you reached? I thought they'd come pick you." "Miriam." My voice cracked. He told me not to come to the wedding." There was a long silence. Then a soft sigh. "Auntie, I heard something. I didn't want to tell you." My heart tightened. "His in-laws," she continued. They think you're too traditional. They want a modern image for the wedding photos and videos. They said it would look too old-fashioned if you were sitting in the front row." I closed my eyes as the words sank in. Too old-fashioned. Too traditional. Too old. An ache spread across my chest, slow and suffocating. Miriam spoke again, regret heavy in her voice. "And the girl's mother. She said you'd take attention away because people would feel sorry for you being alone." Sorry for me. All my life I had stood strong. Raised my son alone. Educated him. Ate less so he could eat more. Walked to work so he could have books. And now, in the eyes of his new family, I was just a shadow, something to hide. "Thank you, Beta," I whispered. "Don't worry. I'll manage." My voice shook despite my attempt to stay composed. I booked a small, cheap guest house near the airport. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic look when I walked in dragging my little suitcase, but I didn't explain anything. That night, in the dim room smelling faintly of old paint, I sat on the edge of the bed holding the heirloom veil in my lap. My grandmother's embroidery glimmered softly under the yellow light. So much love had passed through this fabric, and now, it would never touch my daughter-in-law's forehead. I placed the veil beside me and pressed my palms to my eyes. The tears came like rain. Silent. Relentless. Hot. I cried for the child I had raised. I cried for the mother I had been. I cried for the place I no longer had in my own son's life. But as my tears soaked the muslin cloth, something unexpected stirred inside me. Small, faint, but real. A flicker of resolve. A whisper. No more. I straightened my back slowly. I wiped my face. And for the first time in many years, I felt my spine grow firm again. If they did not want me, I would not beg to be wanted. And without knowing it, that night, in a tiny guest house room, my quiet revenge had already begun. Sleep did not find me that night. I drifted between long stretches of staring at the ceiling and brief moments of exhausted dozing, only to wake again with the same heaviness pressing against my ribs. The cheap guest house blanket felt rough against my skin, but it was not the scratchiness that bothered me. It was the emptiness. In 75 years of life, I had endured grief, loneliness, hunger, widowhood, but betrayal by the child I raised with my own hands, that was a new wound, one that cut deeper than any other. At dawn, when the first pale light seeped through the thin curtains, I sat up and folded the heirloom veil with slow, steady hands. It no longer felt like a gift. It felt like a memory I had to protect from people who didn't value it, or me. I placed it gently into my suitcase. Then I stood before the mirror. My reflection stared back at me. Tired eyes, silver hair tied neatly, wrinkles etched like stories across my skin. Once, I might have looked at this reflection and felt old. But not today. Today, I felt sharpened. Awake. As though the betrayal had stripped away years of softness and left steel behind. I changed into a clean, simple outfit, combed my hair, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The city was just beginning to stir. Shopkeepers lifting shutters, street vendors setting carts, the distant hum of cars. I walked slowly, deliberately, toward a building I had never visited before. A lawyer's office. I stood outside for a moment, breathing deeply. My late husband's words floated back to me like a whisper carried by the wind. "Amina, take care of what is yours. Don't give away your life's work blindly." Until yesterday, I thought giving everything to my son was the natural order of things. Isn't that what mothers do? Hand over their lives, their earnings, their blessings? But now I understood. Love should not require a woman to erase herself. The young lawyer looked surprised when I explained my situation, but he listened respectfully. I told him about the house, the one my son lived in, boasting proudly to everyone it was his. I told him about the land that had come from my parents, the savings I had tucked away, the business shares I had invested in his name, but never legally transferred. All of it was still mine. And yesterday, I had arrived ready to gift it all. Every brick, every inch, every rupee, as a mother's blessing for her son's new life. But yesterday was gone. I want to rewrite my will, I said firmly. The lawyer nodded and began drafting papers. I want everything, the house, the land, the shares, transferred to a charitable trust. His pen paused. A trust? For what purpose, madam? For elderly women abandoned by their families, I said, my voice steady, clear. Women like me. Women who gave everything and were left with nothing. The lawyer's expression softened with respect. What would you like to name the trust? I closed my eyes for a moment. My husband's name, I whispered. Let his memory shelter those who have no one. We spent hours reviewing documents, signing pages, ensuring every detail was correct. My hand trembled with age, but my signature never faltered. By afternoon, everything was legally sealed. My son would inherit nothing. Not out of spite, but out of justice. As I stepped out of the office, sunlight warmed my face. I felt lighter, as if I had set down a burden I didn't realize I had carried. I typed a message to my son with calm fingers. Beta, I am in the city. Do not worry. I wish you a happy wedding and a happy life. No accusations. No explanations. No pain. Just a goodbye wrapped in grace. That evening, I made one more decision. Not to confront him, not to disrupt the wedding, not to cause a scene. I would go quietly. But before that, I wanted to see him one last time. Not as a mother attending her son's milestone, but as a woman saying farewell to what she had built. So as the sun dipped behind the skyline, I walked toward the wedding venue. Not dressed for celebration, but for closure. My revenge had already unfolded. Now, all that remained was the final severing of a bond that had been broken long before I arrived. The wedding venue shimmered with lights, golden strings draped across archways, flowers hanging like frozen rain, cameras flashing endlessly. Everything looked grand, extravagant, and painfully unfamiliar. For a moment, I stood outside the entrance, blending with the shadows like an old tree watching a celebration in someone else's garden. I didn't plan to go inside. I had no right to, not anymore. But I wanted to see him. Just once. Not as a mother fighting for a place, but as a woman releasing the last thread tying her to a child who no longer saw her. From behind a group of guests, I caught a glimpse of him. My son. He looked handsome, glowing with youth and happiness. His sherwani gleamed under the lights, his smile wide and carefree. He posed for photos, laughed with his wife's family, bowed respectfully to every camera lens as if he belonged in a magazine. He did not look like a man who missed his mother. He did not look like a man who had sent her away. He looked whole. And I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in years, I saw him not as my child, not as my responsibility, not as the center of my world, but simply as a man making his choices. Choices that no longer involved me. A small smile crept onto my lips. Not sadness. Not bitterness. Closure. I stepped back, letting the curtain of night fold around me, and walked away. The next morning, at the guest house, a furious pounding rattled my door. Bang! 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 Oh me! Open the door right now. His voice. I calmly folded my shawl before unlocking the door. He stormed inside, eyes blazing, hair disheveled from lack of sleep or perhaps too much celebration. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled paper, one of the documents the lawyer had sent him after the transfer was finalized. What is this? He shouted, waving it in my face. You gave everything away? Everything? The house, the land, all of it. Why would you do that to me? I looked at him quietly, letting his anger wash over me like a passing storm. To you. I repeated softly. I didn't do anything to you, Beta. I simply decided to do something for myself. You were going to give it to me, he insisted. You said. I interrupted gently. But then you told me not to come to your wedding. You told me I would make things awkward. You told me that my presence had no place in your life. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words that didn't exist. Ma, you're overreacting. The situation was. No, I said, raising a hand. For 75 years, I have been patient, loving, forgiving. I gave and gave until I had nothing left for myself. But yesterday, sitting alone with all the gifts I brought, I realized something. I took a deep breath. If a son can abandon his mother with a text message, then he does not deserve the blessings she carried. He stared at me stunned. I continued, my voice calm, steady, unshakable. So yes, I gave everything away, not out of revenge, but out of justice for the women who were thrown aside like I was. They will live in my home. They will walk on my land. They will sleep peacefully in beds I provided. They will be my family now. He took a step toward me, his eyes pleading. Ma, please. But I shook my head. I came here with love. You sent me away. Now I leave with peace. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back gently, not in anger, but in acceptance. Goodbye, Beta. Live the life you chose. And before he could speak again, I walked past him, down the narrow hallway of the guest house, out into the morning sun, and into a world where I owed no one anything. Months later, I stood at the entrance of the elderly women's home that now carried my husband's name. Laughter echoed from the courtyard, soft, fragile, beautiful. Women who had been abandoned now shared meals, songs, and stories together. As I watched them, warmth bloomed inside me. I opened my diary and wrote a single line. I lost a son, but I found myself again. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, finally free.